Sorry, folks, you've been waiting. We should have begun a few seconds ago. I can't exactly tell you how many seconds ago, but now we're set. All right, we are back to finish off this wonderful book by Samir Khalil, Samir S.J., 111 Questions on Islam. And we're going to take the final part of the book starting in, what is that? Section
177.
Yeah, 177. That's section 5, Islam and Christianity, an avoidable encounter, the possible dialogue. So before I turn it over to you, Joseph, oh, by the way, this is Vivian, who's still with me. She's stuck with me. Why don't you move a little closer, Vivian? I'll move a little farther.
Okay.
We'll center ourselves
Will I hit
better.
your mouse?
Oh, my mouse is okay. Well,
Okay.
I'll take care
I
of
don't
my
want to
mouse.
mess anything up with the mouse.
So we got Vivian here, myself, Father Fessio, and there on the screen you got Joseph Pearce. We're your team for the Formed Book Club. Tell your friends about it.
Yeah.
Can you friend us? No, I guess not. We're not on Facebook. We might be on Facebook. I don't know.
Well,
Joseph, do you have a Facebook page?
I have a Facebook page that someone else does for me. I don't do Facebook personally.
It's the same with me. I think there's one.
there's one for Gracious Press.
There's one for me too.
Oh, there is. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
but I've never seen it. But you've got one for your family, right?
I don't have one.
Okay.
No, I don't personally want to do Facebook, but there's a page, Joseph Pierce Facebook page, where people can read articles and things.
But we're not against technology because here we are.
Right.
It's just that there's sort of these flexible limits that people have to make a decision. It's blurry, kind of a gray area. If you're more black and white like I am, black and white, you draw the lines. By the way, I want to welcome you, Joseph, with your suit and tie. This is a sign that Joseph is outside of his home turf. He's coming from
Well,
Denver.
yes, I think forgive me, viewers, for not bothering to put a suit and tie on when I'm actually in my home office. It would just seem a little bit weird to me. But I'm actually at the Augustine Institute in Denver. I'm a book director for the Augustine Institute, or director of book publishing, I should say. And that's one of the reasons we're doing this book club, because Ignatius Press and the Augustine Institute are partners in various joint ventures, and certainly the next book that we'll be doing, Literature What Every Catholic Should Know, is one such joint venture. This one is not. This is an IP title, of course.
Yes, so that's good. And you can see starting to impress his employers there. We have no one to impress, although Vivian is always dressed very well. And,
Thank you.
And her daughters have picked that up. You should see both of her daughters. They're always, I wouldn't say they're austere, but they're careful about the way they spend the money. But
just to defend myself, even when I'm doing the book clubs from my home office, I don't turn up in a t-shirt, Father. It's usually a dress shirt, at least. It's just I don't want to wear a tie, that's all.
All right, well, so let us go on. I thought what we did last time was pretty good, where we kind of see who's got the first, the page to comment on. Joseph, but why don't you take the lead here? What's your first comment?
Well, actually, my first page I want to comment on is the first page of section 5, so I'll probably do Trump.
All right, well, yeah, we can't beat that.
Well, I just think for me, I mean, I've been on a learning curve these last few weeks, because I didn't know much about Islam, truth be told, and I know much more now. I hope that's true of the people that are watching. But it says here, if I may read it, it's just 2 lines in the paragraph. Humanity, in the classic Muslim understanding, is divided into 3 categories. So we like this very neat categorization of everybody into one of 3 categories. The first category is the believers, that is Muslims. The second category is the protected peoples. These are Christians, Jews, and Sabaeans, who are considered monotheists but imperfect believers. They can preserve their faith without being obliged to convert to Islam. However, they must be subjugated, as it is recommended by some verses of the Quran that warn believers to guard against becoming friends with them or giving them power over Muslims. The third category is that of polytheists, so the unbelievers. These people must be fought, and the only alternative to death for them is the conversion to Islam. Therefore, the Muslim jurists divide the world into 3 parts that correspond to these categories: the house of peace, the house of protection, and the house of war. And I thought the reason I drew this passage out is I think it encapsulates the global situation in which we find ourselves in from the perspective of Islam. But basically, you either have to be a Muslim, or if you're a Jew or a Christian, you're under their protection, but you're a second-class citizen who's subjugated by them and subject to them. And then, or finally, you're going to be forced to convert or be killed if you're a polytheist of some sort. And so I think this really does offer a real insight into the problem we have, because obviously this view of the world is very, very different from either the secular view of the world or from the Christian view of the world. Clearly, there is a clash of cultures here if this is the case.
And we'll see as we go forward here something we've mentioned before, namely, because Islam is based on a book which is said to have been dictated by God to Muhammad, there's no changing it. So you've got the Quran, you've got the Hadith, which is the vignettes from the life of Muhammad. Those are fixed. And so if the book and the Hadith divide the world up into these three houses, there's nothing we can do about it. By the way, the second house, the Christians can be in that house if they're willing to be subjected and pay the tax, the Yitzhak tax. But if they don't want to be subjected, don't pay the tax, then they become part of the house of war. And
it's not that dissimilar, in fact, Father, to the situation of the Catholics in Elizabethan England. Basically, if you conform, you're fine. If you don't conform, you're killed. And it's obviously that's not a situation any Christian wants to find himself in.
Yeah, that's true. All right, so Vivian, do you have any comments? I want to go on to page 179. Do you have something before that?
No, I just wanted to remark that Father Samir does say that the situation of Christians is ambiguous, because even though they're this protected class and they're respected on one hand, that doesn't always translate in practice. So, for example, what we saw with ISIS just recently, literally wiping out the Christians, were they just skipping over those parts of the Quran that, I think even though there are these three distinct statuses, in fact, it's not as clear cut because there's no authoritative interpretation of all of the verses of the Quran. So either way, though, the situation of Christians is dicey under Muslim rule.
Yeah.
Another thing I want to interject here, not on a specific passage, but rereading this book, I am again impressed by the moderation, the balance, and the care with which Father Samir writes this. It's not a polemic against Islam, nor is it an apologetic for Islam. He's explaining what the Quran says, what the Hadith are, what the tradition has been, what the Arabic words are, how they're translated. I mean, it's really an excellent book to get a fundamental grasp of what Islam really is, not by a partisan for or against. I find that anyway. 179, towards the bottom there, he's talking about what Muhammad did when he came back to Mecca, because Mecca was a religious shrine, and there were a lot of these statues and shrines to pagan gods. He says, the rites of the pilgrims to Mecca are all of pagan origin, but are Islamicized, to the point that the famous theologian Al-Ghazali in The Proof of Islam wrote, okay, so what happened was once Muhammad was successful and they conquered the Meccans, now they took over the shrine and they left the various shrines there, the various statues and the practices, but they conformed them to Islam. And so the great Islamic scholar Al-Ghazali, Middle Ages, writes, the pilgrimage is the most irrational thing in Islam. There we perform gestures and rites that are absolutely irrational. For this reason, the pilgrimage is the place where we can, better than any other place, demonstrate our faith, because reason does not understand anything at all of it, and only faith makes us do these actions. Blind obedience to God is the best evidence of our Islam. And then Samir says, a really interesting passage. I mean, there it is again, the demonstration that Islam is voluntarist. That is, God wills it, You do it. If it's irrational, it's still what he wants because reason is not necessarily part of God. I mean,
Yeah.
and Ratzinger makes this, Benedict makes this so often, especially in his talk in Regensburg 2006, that the Christian God, the God we believe in, is a God who is love and will, but also logos together. It's always reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's a correlation between uh, between Aquinas and Augustine on the one hand, and Aristotle and Plato on the other, and the good, the true, and the beautiful. That basically the true, in other words, the rational, ratio, the logos, is part of what Christianity is, and we're not called to believe anything which is irrational, and that's to me that's an abysmal distance and difference between Christendom and Islam. Abysmal in the full sense of the word. There's an abyss that separates us.
Right, and it doesn't mean that Christians believe we can understand fully and comprehend fully all that God is and all that Jesus is and all that Jesus teaches. It just means that however mysterious it might be, however complicated or strange it might be, you can't show that it's against reason.
No, in fact, on the contrary, all it is showing is the limitations of our ability to comprehend reason. God is the ratio. Okay, so obviously the Trinity is entirely rational, and the fact that we can't reason it is because we're limited, finite creatures trying to comprehend the infinite. But it doesn't mean that it's inherently irrational. It just means that we have to accept our own limitations as finite beings.
And I'll quote one of my many favorite passages from Augustine. Si comprehendis non est Deus. If you understand, it's not God. But it doesn't mean it's irrational. It just means it's beyond our full understanding.
Yeah.
I got some on page 186. Anybody ahead of that?
No, it's yours as far as I'm concerned.
Well, before that, I did have this very interesting, we don't need to go into all of it, but on page 183, well, beginning on 182, when he explains the Christianity that does get incorporated to the Quran and why. Because the Christianity we find explained in the Quran is not true Christianity, it's heretical Christianity. And so Father Samir does a good job of explaining the origins of all of that.
But wait a second. On page 183, he actually says, on the bottom paragraph there, the Islamic interpretation of the dogmatic aspects of Christianity cannot be found in any of the Christian traditions, not even in the heretical ones. So he's saying not even in heretics can you find what his idea of Christianity is.
Right. Although I would say he does also say that they did have the apocryphal gospel, the non-canonical gospels were floating around. And so somehow what they mean got all gobbledygooky, and maybe no one sect can claim responsibility for the mess that it became in the Quran, but nevertheless, he did have Christian sources.
Well, he definitely had Christian sources.
And he was conquering Christian peoples. I mean, Samir also says that the majority of the people that Muhammad conquered in the Arabian Peninsula were some kind of Christian.
Yeah.
So anyway, I found all that fascinating because that history.
You do wonder as well, when you've got this mythology, top of page 184, it's quite logical for Muslims to conceive these dogmas according to a storyline from Arab mythology. A god takes a wife and they conceive another god. I mean, you could be tempted to see this as just rhetorical device on Muhammad's part to how do I actually convert these Christians away from their Christianity? I'll take part of what they believe and then do what I want with it to actually prove that it's not monotheism.
Well, I don't even give him that much credit because the Trinity is a very difficult thing to explain and to grasp, and it doesn't surprise me that this Bedouin culture in the Arabian Peninsula, if you tell them God has a son, they are going to interpret that literally in their minds, that means you're saying God must have slept with a woman and had a son the way Zeus did or the other pagan gods did. So I don't necessarily give Muhammad credit for
Well, but it's somewhat odd because he does
trying
also
to undermine something, but rather just taking at face value things people are saying and finding it anathema.
right, but it's also odd because he does say, I can't remember exactly where it was, but it's in this section that they're quite comfortable with the virgin birth. So they're quite comfortable with the fact that the angel, the Annunciation, and the miraculous virgin birth without a father is the human father. All right, so it's not as if they're not able to accept things which are, well, out of the ordinary. So I don't really see what the leap is from beginning believing in a virgin birth with a man who's the greatest of the prophets until Muhammad comes along, who, well, who is his father then?
Well, if you think about it, the Jewish rejection of Christ is on the same basis. That those Jews who did reject Christ on the same basis, meaning they cannot comprehend how the infinite God could become a finite man. I mean, you can
But did the
as
Jews
soon as you
reject
say Jesus is God's son, I mean, we take for granted that we've been, even if we weren't raised Christian, Joseph, you and I, we're converts. Nevertheless, we've been hearing since the time we could hear Jesus, the Son of God, in our culture. That doesn't strike our ear as anything bizarre. But
right? But the Jews didn't believe, unless I'm wrong, and I may well be wrong because this is not my area of expertise by any means. That the Jews didn't believe in the virgin birth, did they? They cast aspersions and doubts upon that.
I'm just saying these are really two separate things. As soon as you say a man is the Son of God, you're stepping on territory that a lot of people simply can't accept.
I understand that, but it's also surely stepping territory people can't accept that a woman has a man child without a father.
Yeah, I get it. I get that that also is hard to accept. I'm just saying they're not the same thing. And
Well,
that
they're not the same thing, but they're both.
this rejection of a man being God's son, this is a huge hurdle for Jews also to cross.
Right, because the idea of God having a son reflects on the divinity itself. The idea of a virgin bearing a child has to do with anthropology, with man. They're two different areas there. They might, both hard to accept. But I think for people who are monotheists,
Yeah.
especially for Muslims, they believe God can do anything. In fact, they don't even believe in causality. They believe every birth is, in a certain sense, a virgin birth, in the sense that it's not the man who causes the woman to get pregnant; it's God, Allah, who does it. They're occasionalists. That is, the man and woman intercourse is the occasion for Allah to do something, but it's not really a causal act on the part of the man and the woman. That's a whole Muslim philosophy for those who've thought it through.
Yeah.
Whereas with respect to God having a son, that for the Muslim or for the pious Jew reflects upon their monotheism.
It does. And it's I remember a Orthodox Jewish professor I had in university who said the incarnation is serious business. And I had to really think about that because I just taken for granted growing up in a Christian culture, Jesus, the Son of God, even though at the time I wasn't even sure I believed it myself. I think we have to appreciate what, as you said, an abyss. That's an abyss for Jews and Muslims, strict monotheists to cross. That is an abyss for them to get across, and I think we have to appreciate that.
So where are we then?
I don't know. Where are we?
Joseph
should do something.
Let's go to page 186 here.
Oh, 186. Okay.
Top of the page. Another one being a hadith, being an account of something in Muhammad's life. Another one states that no church should be erected in Muslim lands, that no damaged or ruined one should be restored. So now I understand better. If in the Quran it says you can't build a church in a Muslim land or restore one that's been destroyed or damaged, well, of course, they're not going to have reciprocity with us. So we say, well, look, you can build mosque in Rome, but we have to be able to build a church in Riyadh. Oh no, we can't do that because our scripture says it's against the law.
And you also think about what that means in practice about the so-called protected people, right? We're not going to force you to convert, but we're going to make it impossible for you to worship.
Right.
You can't have a church, right?
Practically speaking, it becomes impossible to worship.
Yeah.
Yes.
If there weren't oil in the Middle East, I think there'd be a lot fewer compromises on the part of the West. I want to know 193. Anybody got something before 193?
I'm also 193. Great minds think alike. You go ahead, Father.
Well, maybe yours is the top. Mine's at the bottom half of the page. Where's yours?
Mine's at the bottom half of the page. I told you, great minds think alike, Father.
Okay. Well, yeah, because here, Father Samir, he summarizes so beautifully. This is the answer to the question 99. Mm-hmm. What are the fundamental aspects of Christianity that are denied by Islam?
Yeah.
The Quran denies the doctrinal foundations of Christian religion, Christ's divinity, the incarnation, the crucifixion, the redemption, and the Trinity. Oh, okay. Well, that's
yeah. What's left?
What's left?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it just actually it reminds me of a conversation I had this weekend. I was at the Chesterton conference in Kansas City, and in the afterglow afterwards, someone was trying to say that Muslims and Jews worship the same God as the Christians. I said, well, the absolutely central to a Christian understanding of God is the Trinity and the Incarnation. If you don't believe in the Trinity and the Incarnation, you're not worshiping the same God that I worship. And the fact that you're just saying I worship one God, that's not just because it's one God doesn't make it the same God.
Yes, I mean, that question comes up often, and my response is always sic et non, yes and no, that insofar as they recognize there is only one God, one transcendent being who's the origin of everything, which is, well, that there's only one God, so whom they're worshiping is that God.
Right.
But it's not the same idea of God.
Right.
The God they worship is not.
But Father, thanks for giving me the excuse to just bring some controversy into the discussion here, because isn't that the sin of Tashlanism? From the last battle from Archie, because the Calamans worship one God and they call him Tash, and the Christians worship Aslan. Oh, sorry, the Narnians worship Aslan, and it's the modernist theologians that say, well, they're the same thing, and they just called it Tashlan. But in actual fact, they both worship one God, but one God's demonic, and the other one is actually divine. And so, I'm not suggesting that other monotheistic gods are demonic, but I am suggesting there's not necessarily a logic that because people worship one God and say he created the cosmos, it's necessarily the same God that we worship.
Two things on that. Was Tash saved or not?
Sorry?
What was the god's name Tash? I forget. Or was the servant's name?
Yeah, Tash was the god of the Calamans, and he was a real what?
Right. Okay, but who was his faithful servant? What was his name?
Emeth. I mean.
Okay, Emeth, which means truth. Which means truth, by the way, in Hebrew. But
yeah.
But was Emeth saved or not?
Yes, but that's because that's just an enunciation of baptism of desire, that he was worshipping the wrong God, but he's worshipping in such a virtuous way that it was accepted as a baptism of desire.
Well, no, he was worshiping the true God under a false guise.
Yes,
but that's different. That's really different from. I mean, taking the Jews now, the God they worship is in fact the God that revealed himself to them. And the fact that they have a difficult time understanding, accepting the Trinity, when Jews and Muslims too hear Trinity, they think we're saying three gods. That's how they hear what we say. Even though we keep insisting, no, three persons and one God, to say that they're not worshiping, well, the Jews anyway, to say that they're not worshiping God, I'm sorry.
No, but we're talking...
I mean, I don't want to get too controversial here, but the point is that they don't worship the fullness of God, because they do not worship Jesus Christ. They do not see the incarnate God
They don't
or the
see it.
Trinity.
I agree with you, but that doesn't mean they're
But there's
They,
a,
they were basically led in the old covenant. They were led to the threshold and then refused to cross it.
But if they're being faithful to what's been revealed to them, and that person who revealed himself was God, they're worshiping the true God. Okay,
Well, I'm going to dispute that because the true God is Jesus Christ, and they don't worship him.
okay.
no,
We
but,
can agree to disagree.
well, but the God that
That's good. Let's do
they
that.
worship God the Creator, and there is a God the Creator,
Yeah.
and there's only one. And so, although they see him incomplete and sometimes deformed, not as an evil God like Tash, but still as a singular God, uh, to that extent, we are doing the same thing. We're worshiping God as the creator of the universe. But here's something, Vivian, you say that when we say we believe in Trinity, they see as if we believe in three gods. Well, actually, I know myself, I think most Christians are practically speaking tritheists. That is to say, if you reflect on the fact that there's one God in three persons, that the Father, Son, and Spirit have the same intellect. There's only one intellect and only one will. That's kind of a mind-blowing thing. You think, well, wait a minute, Jesus is God's Son, but is Jesus' divine intellect exactly the same with no distinction from the Father's intellect? Yes, there's only one intellect in God. Because one nature means one intellect, one will. And so I think we tend, because we're creatures which are bodily, and it's hard for us to imagine three persons that aren't three human beings. You know?
Are we going off on that Trinitarian tangent? Not necessarily anything wrong with that, but what I usually do is try to go by way of St. Patrick's Shamrock, which is perhaps not that good. But you talk about the three dimensions of space. The unity of space is three dimensions. The unity of time, past, present, and future is three dimensions. Energy is something which is not just a static something. E equals mc squared, etc. So we can see there's all sorts of things which are unities that in some sense are also trinities. And I sort of see the fingerprints of God, if you like, in the physical cosmos, in the material cosmos, in that. And I think those sort of analogies are probably better for us to try to at least comprehend the incomprehensible, so to speak, if that's a paradox and not a contradiction.
Very good, St. Patrick. You use a shamrock too? All right, I want to jump to page 196. Anything ahead of that?
You're ahead of me.
So it's a question 100. How can the figure of Muhammad be considered from a Christian point of view? And he gives his answer there. But I've always thought this. Muhammad, I don't doubt his historical existence. I mean, there was a Muhammad. The Quran exists. It somehow comes through him or as a result of him. So how do we explain Muhammad's experience? And I say there's only three possible sources of what he said, thought, and did. One is human nature. He's a man. Two, it's from God. Three, it's from the evil one. There's no other source from which he can draw to have his statements which are now in the Quran. It's either from God, from man, or from the devil. Now, there can be intermixtures there of things. But if Muhammad denies the Trinity, denies the incarnation, denies the resurrection, denies the Holy Spirit,
denies that Jesus died on the cross.
Denies
How about that?
On the cross. I mean, so
Yeah.
Either he's right, in which Christians are wrong, or Christians are right and he's wrong. You can't. This isn't like quantum, what they call superposition, where you can have yes and no both be potentially true until you observe it. No, this is either Muhammad is right or Christians are right. Okay, let's assume that Christians are right. Then where does Muhammad get what he says? It can't be from God because God would be contradicting himself. It's either got to be from Muhammad or the evil one of the two, or a combination. I don't. There's logically and existentially, there's no other way you can explain Muhammad.
Logic, I agree completely. You know, on the assumption that Christianity is true, then Muhammad's human and or both and demonic.
Yeah. What are you thinking, Vivian?
Well, you wonder his first religious experiences, could there have been authentic religious experiences, the reaction to polytheism, the reaction to idolatry? Could he have had his own conversion like experience? I think he
Yeah,
could have
but
actually.
not as a revelation from God, but
Well,
rather as a deeper understanding of humanity. But it's a natural thing to know there's one God who's our creator and so on.
right,
And the polytheism is wrong and these immoral things are wrong. But that's not positive revelation of God.
right. But it could have been the starting
Yeah.
of a religious awakening that I think we can say could have been a legitimate, not
There's a chapter
sincere.
a wonderful chapter in Lewis's book, Miracles, which talks about, it's called Christianity and Religion. And his point is that religions are seeking God. It's part of our nature. Christianity is God speaking to us. And there's no question in my mind that Muhammad was a religious person. He
Right.
was seeking God, and therefore he saw certain things, but he was not hearing divine
But
revelation.
let's
Well,
return to
well,
the original logic of the discussion here, because if it wasn't Muhammad seeking God, if you like, the divine image in Muhammad seeking God, but on the contrary, was a supernatural revelation which did not reveal the truth, but in fact deceived. I can't see how we can say that that comes from the divine. The only way we can say that is if the revelations that Muhammad received were distorted and perverted either by him or by his followers in the period between it becoming the Quran. So the only way you can believe it was a genuine divine revelation is if it was perverted in the telling, so that the shadow of the demonic fell before the Quran becomes into print.
well, I would even say before that. So you have this man having a religious encounter, perhaps. I mean, we say Muhammad's seeking God. Look, God is seeking Muhammad too. God is seeking all of us all the time. But when he goes from being a religious seeker to a conqueror, all right, now we're getting into a different modus operandi. And now, as he becomes on these raids and he's conquering people and subjugating people, and the things that he says and answers to these questions as he goes along is what becomes ultimately the Quran. I think it's not difficult to surmise what would happen to a man, any man actually, who might have began with a sincere religious impulse, but found himself.
So, yeah, so I can accept that. I can
Yeah,
accept that it's a
yeah,
possibility that the supernatural experience, on the assumption he wasn't lying about the
yeah, and
supernatural
that's
experience,
also still possible. I don't
on
know.
the assumption he's being honest about the supernatural experience is either from God or it's demonic. If it's from God, if there was a genuine revelation from God, then he's poisoned it. It's been poisoned because from whatever that revelation was, which what we actually see in the Quran, there's a diabolical shadow that falls, and so you can only believe it was a divine revelation if you can also accept that it was actually poisoned thereafter.
Which can happen to anyone, which I think should be a sobering reminder to anyone that when you start when you start being your own conqueror, your own and he's not the only one.
Well,
Yeah, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely, right? Lord
and
Acton.
even independently of the power in being conquered, I mean, this is one of Adrian von Speier's ideas, or Balthasar's description of what she did, is that she will claim it because there's a book by her, two books actually, two volumes, in which she is re-experiencing the experiences of mystics. And the point of this that to her is that even though God had revealed himself to Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, and all these great mystics, that the receptor colored things, by the culture, by the language, by the experience, by the habits, and so on. And so it wasn't like a pure mouthpiece of divine revelation. And nor does Balthasar say that Adrienne was a pure mouthpiece, but he does say
nobody is.
No, but he does say that was her great gift as a mystic, was transparency, not getting in the way of the revelation. And so it's interesting when you read Adrienne's, Balthasar is writing down what Adrienne claims to be her vision of Teresa's vision or John the Cross's vision, and you compare that with Teresa and John the Cross, you see there's some differences. Well, anyway, but my only point is that even if God supernaturally intended to, in fact did, reveal things to Muhammad, they got distorted or tainted if they come out as saying Jesus didn't die. That's,
right. That's a direct contradiction to what revealed before.
Yeah.
But I don't want to just with the sweep of my hand negate the possibilities that are here. And
I think it's easier. I do think it's more easily explained that the religious principles in the Quran come from what any human being can know by reason alone. That you don't need divine revelation to know that God is God, that God is great, all that kind of stuff. So I don't think we require to say it was a supernatural revelation for his religious experience. I think it's enough to say he's a human being who had a human being's experience of God, which comes from any creature. But we can argue about that. I don't know.
Oh, he just says he did.
Pardon me?
He got frozen there. Joseph, come out of the kryptonite.
Is Joseph frozen again?
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
It could be any of those.
I heard. Say something, Joseph.
How much did you hear?
You're back. Okay.
Okay.
Well, I am back.
We thought you were
frozen. I was really just summarizing basically all of the above. I mean, it could have been a divine revelation that was later distorted. It could have been a diabolical deception that Muhammad believed, or it could have been a lie that Muhammad spread. I mean,
that's right.
The point is, they're all logical possibilities, and we don't know the answer.
That's right.
So my last comment I want to make is on page 202, 203. Anybody?
I've got another couple, but they're after that, so you still.
They're after that. Okay. So this is a little longer one here, 202, bottom of the page. This has to do with the conception of God. We talked about this a bit already, about whether it's the same God or not.
Mm-hmm.
And Father Samir says, even behind identical or similar expressions, there can be totally different meanings that are important to learn in order to deepen one's knowledge of the truth, not from the desire to emphasize the distinctions. That a sentence, quote, God is merciful, unquote, for a Muslim means that God, the all-powerful, the transcendent, can bend down to man with mercy or deny his mercy to whomever he wishes. This is very different from the idea of the merciful God that we find in the Old and New Testaments. And then he continues on page 203 at the top there. And I mentioned this in a previous session we had.
Yep.
It is not by chance that among the 99 names of God that the Muslim tradition draws from the Quran, there is not the appellation Father, being an attribute incompatible with the Quranic God and denied by the Quran itself. So we worship the same God? Yes. But what do we mean by God?
What do we mean by God? What do we mean by mercy?
Yeah. All right. Dixie has spoken.
Well, and the purpose of this chapter, by the way, is to give Christians guidance on dialogue with Islam, right? What are the things we need to know? If we're going to get into a conversation, what are the things we need to know about Islam? And Father Samir says in several places, we have to be honest and authentic with what we believe, why we believe it, and not tippy-toe around because we're afraid of offending people, or we're never really going to get at the important questions and distinctions like the one you just made.
It's like, I mean, again, we've quoted this many times in the book club. Chesterton's maxim that he and his brother always arguing, but they never quarreled. That both sides of the dialogue have to be willing to argue without quarreling. In other words, to agree to disagree and just get. The point is that's a win-win situation, even if at the end of the day you both still disagree with each other, because at least you know where the other person's coming from and what they believe, and you can move forward from a position of knowledge and not a position of ignorance. And so, it's a win-win situation, even if at the end of the day we don't, neither side is convinced by the other side's argument.
Good. So we've concluded this book. We had hoped that we could get Father Samir to join us, but we're not.
You haven't concluded it, Father. You haven't concluded the book. I've got one more thing I want to say.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I've been waiting patiently because I've got 210 to 211 here.
I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
That's okay. So towards the bottom of page 210, if I can just read it, it's about 10 or 12 lines, and then a quick comment. And so
Right.
It is wrong to identify Christianity with the West, even if the Christian faith is one of the most important foundational elements of the West. In this context, the testimony Christians are required to give is decisive. Some aspects of modern-day Western life, such as widespread ethical relativism, a mistaken conception of freedom that is confused with the possibility of doing whatever one wants without any moral reference, and the commercialization of the human body, confirm Muslims in their judgment of Western society as corrupt and decadent. I believe that these aspects of Western culture must be addressed with far more criticism on the part of Christians, because they are significant indicators of a society that removes God from its reference points. So again, I think as part of any dialogue with Islam, we have to, a point of contact with them is a point of agreement, is that we can agree that the modern hedonistic, relativistic West is not Christendom, and we have no more in common with them and with the modern relativists than we have with Islam. And so that's something which I think we have to avoid the danger of being drawn into a dichotomy. And I think that a lot of Muslim propaganda is that Christianity and the hedonistic West are the same thing.
Yes.
And we have to insist in dialogue that no, they're not. And we're not speaking on their behalf. In fact, we can speak with you against them insofar as what you don't like about them. For the most part, we don't like about them either.
Well, there's been instances in the past, many, in which the United Nations, the Islamic nations, and some Christian principle, like I'm thinking of pro-life stuff, where the United States has actually been institutionally pretty strong under certain governments, that we've united with Muslims for those kinds of things.
Right. And the only other thing I want to say, Father, before we wrap up, is that about the appendices, which are of course part of the book, so to speak.
Oh, yeah.
Most of them, I think, are not going to be very interesting. So Islam in Italy, especially as the book's already. But I did want to draw attention to the chronology of Islam, Appendix A, which goes from the time of Muhammad right through to the present day. And I think that's a very useful reference point from page 219 to 223. So a 5-page chronology of Islam, which I think that anybody that that reads this book is going to find very helpful and very useful.
Yeah, I did. I agree. Okay, now can we conclude?
Please.
All right, so we didn't get Father Samir to come. We're sorry about that. But tell us about the future, Joseph. What's coming up next?
Well, somewhat bashful putting that on me, as the next book we're going to discuss is actually my book. But thank you, Father, for embarrassing me, so to speak. Father's holding up their literature, what every Catholic should know. So the Augustine Institute and the Ignatius Press have jointly publishing this new series of books, What Every Catholic Should Know. And the first 2 titles in that series were Salvation, What Every Catholic Should Know, which you all know is something we've discussed already. And then my own book, Literature, What Every Catholic Should Know. So we're going to commence 4 weeks of talking about this book as of next Monday. So, Father, do you want to
We
elucidate?
will cover chapters 1 through 6. Begins chapter 1, what should every Catholic know about literature, up to chapter 6, the Pilgrim Muse. So we will see you all next week. Thank you for joining us.